Far beyond Noah, the time dragon watched the plane from a place where space had no meaning. At that point, the ancient creature had nearly crossed a rule it refused to explain. What interested it most was Levi turning demonic methods against creatures that once considered those methods unbeatable. Its gaze settled on the southern edge of the southern wilderness and did not move. Back inside dimensional space, Levi treated that invisible attention as a threat until Lilith argued otherwise. Lilith said every Wizarding Council record agreed the time dragon had never served the Abyss. Levi answered that ancient records mattered only until an ancient creature became unpredictable. Panda disliked the argument for a simpler reason. Anything that could reach dimensional space deserved suspicion. 3 days passed before the group relaxed enough to return to Noah, without another seven-colored tail appearing. That should have ended the incident, but Levi had already turned his fear into a new experiment. His third night's sacred technique could open paths through unstable space without relying on prepared spatial nodes. The first successful jump dropped a clone into a frozen wilderness absurdly far from Stormwind. Ice covered the horizon, yet the elemental concentration remained strangely poor for a region this brutally cold. Only scattered ice spirits survived there, forgotten elven descendants protected mainly by isolation. What kind of enemy chose a wasteland with no treasure and barely any usable mana? Levi found the answer when an elven lich emerged across the white horizon. Auduras carried the face of an elf, the death aura of a lich. The discovery changed Levi priorities because Sugard had never mentioned the lich, ice spirit origin. Auduras also found the meeting strange, since no sane 9th-tier human should visit that empty wasteland. Instead of retreating, Levi moved closer and let the lich decide whether curiosity mattered more than caution. Auduras claimed the wasteland as his territory, sounding offended that anyone would question ownership of frozen emptiness. Levi answered with deliberate confusion while every clone measured possible escape routes. Then Auduras attacked first, and the quiet wasteland disappeared beneath several different schools of magic at once. A spatial slash missed Levi by inches. Fire followed ice, wind followed death, and metallic power erupted from limbs that did not belong together. Levi stopped seeing one lich and started seeing a collection of stolen bodies. One arm carried demonic hardness, another limb released wind. Across the field, the ugliness of the body mattered less than the engineering behind it. Every stolen organ preserved the specialty of a dead expert Auduras refused to waste. That corpse workshop would have disgusted most nobles. Levi started wondering which principles could be copied safely. And then Auduras screamed, releasing a mental attack sharp enough to blank Levi's thoughts for one heartbeat. Inside the region, the next strike came from a steel rock demon limb. Blood-draining power spread through the same battlefield, while spatial pressure tried to stop his clones from escaping. Auduras had built a killing sequence around denying movement, weakening life. Against ordinary 9th-tier saints, the combination probably ended fights before anyone saw what had happened. Levi survived because earlier enemies had forced him to build unusually layered defenses. Blood Ember repaired torn flesh while Void Formless kept shifting his position, just beyond each overlapping spell. Even so, the clone's margin kept shrinking as Auduras increased the output of his stolen legendary organs. How many dead experts had already been reduced to spare parts? Under pressure, Levi asked about the life box instead of retreating. From there, the reaction gave Levi more information than any answer could have provided. Sugared life box suggested someone else knew how to manufacture or hide anchors of undeath. Auduras threatened him immediately, which only confirmed the clue had landed somewhere painful. A lich could rebuild a body. A destroyed life box could never be recovered. For Levi, that weakness turned an immortal-looking enemy into a puzzle with a price tag. He pushed harder, combining nightly sacred techniques while clones forced Auduras to reveal more transplanted abilities. Auduras responded with legendary wind power from one stolen limb, overwhelming the battlefield with a legend's pressure. That was when Levi stopped treating the encounter as reconnaissance and focused entirely on survival. Soon, the legendary spell closed faster than ordinary spatial movement could answer. Levi tore open Void Turbulence and threw the endangered clone through before impact. Auduras followed to the edge, then stopped when the unstable darkness offered no reliable path back. His body had taken centuries to assemble. In response, the lich withdrew, still furious, and immediately found a different problem waiting outside. A legendary elf named Alice descended wind magic strong enough to force Auduras away. Her hatred was personal, sharpened by every elf the lich had slaughtered to improve his stitched body. Auduras cursed her, but rage could not erase the gap between their experience. Within minutes he abandoned the wasteland and escaped through space rather than continue trading injuries. Levi emerged from the turbulence and nearly made Alice attack again on instinct. She expected Auduras' ally or a radiant agent, not an unknown human saint. Levi gave her the safest truth and mentioned half-elves living under Stormwind protection. That detail earned enough trust for Alice to lower her hostility. She warned him that the Elf Forest and Radiance were already trading blood along their border. 2 Radiant legends had entered Elven territory searching for something, and the Elves had caught them leaving. Small clashes followed, while dwarves and elves who normally disliked each other found reasons to start talking. What happened if Radiance managed to provoke elves, humans, orcs, and sea races into moving wild? Levi disliked the answer because human kingdoms were already cracking under church-backed wars. He thanked Alice, left before curiosity became interrogation, and changed course toward the western orc plains. There, safety depended less on walls and more on distance from the human frontier. That made the region perfect for a crime someone else would be blamed for committing. Levi arranged attacks resembling Riot's sanctuary methods and waited for the beast god temple response. On that front, the first legendary bearman arrived angry, confident. Levi's group broke the orcs' resistance without killing him, then pushed Dominator contract into the damaged consciousness. For now, the process took more than an hour. When the contract settled, Ursus opened his eyes with new loyalty carved into his soul. Levi gave him recovery potions because living legendary slaves held more value than corpses. Ursus had entered the ambush as an enemy worth killing. Elsewhere, the next target was another legendary orc. Davis pushed the victim toward prepared ground while Ursus sold the deception from inside. By the time the second legend recognized the trap, too many escape paths had become killing zones. The corpse became essence. The surviving slave became a rumor. The orc plains took the blame. And then the Riot Sanctuary attacked the weakened region, convinced its old enemies had somehow struck first. The beast god temple answered, and a local feud started growing beyond its original borders. Levi confirmed both sides committed real forces before quietly returning to Stormwind. He had spent time, potions, and risk. The orc plains would pay the interest in blood. Back home, Anduin brought him a problem. The coming human chaos might tempt the orcs south again. Under pressure, Levi refused to wait for that invasion politely behind existing walls. He ordered Frostmoon surveys for mountain sites where new fortresses could push the border forward. Anduin warned that overextending would isolate forts and force unwilling nobles to share the risk. For now, Levi said the alternative was letting the orcs choose every future battlefield. Stormwind would push first while Levi urged northern nobles to extend the defensive line. If Blackrock cooperated, Levi was even willing to provide magic cannon support beyond Alpha's formal borders. What was a fortress worth if its best achievement was surviving the enemy's first choice of terrain? Anduin left with maps, engineers, and a problem large enough to reshape Frostmoon province for generations. Then news from Philo made those preparations feel even more urgent. By then, the Ferryman and Stanik factions had turned against their old religious alignment. A church was attacked. A legendary priest nearly died. Philo no longer looked like domestic politics. Southern Alpha nobles panicked because a hostile Philo could place church-backed armies directly against their estates. Dawn answered by sending Nelson and legendary ice mage Gulveig toward Duke Jonathan territory. Gulveig arrived with second-stage confidence and stabilized the threatened northern front quickly. Her presence also told every observer that Dawn had stopped treating Philo as somebody else's political embarrassment. Across the field, the conflict was now part of the religious war surrounding Noah. Kanglen filled with envoys arguing over roads, troops, cannon shipments, food. Levi listened without pretending neutrality, because Stormwind factories mattered to every nervous border lord. Philo rebels fielded many copied magic cannons, far beyond what their old arsenals should contain. Some weapons could have been purchased or captured. At that point, Levi traced the likely answer toward the Church of Radiance. One secret Stormwind once guarded as a monopoly had become another military language, spreading across the continent. That loss hurt less than once would have. By then, Levi watched old technology appear in enemy hands and felt nostalgic instead of afraid. The battlefield kept shifting, and the Ice and Snow Church moved with strategic ambition. Its leaders supported the Ron royal family while watching Philo, Alpha, and Radiance bleed against one another. They had learned the same lesson as Levi: survive chaos by choosing where it lands. From there, the Church of Dawn counterattacked in northern Philo and recovered much of Duke Bolson's lost territory. Duke Jonathan's region held better because its core city had never fallen. Rebel cannon fire still made every advance expensive. A farmer would call that destruction. A quartermaster would call it a demand for more shells, wagons. Levi saw both versions at once and kept asking who would pay for the next year of war. Soon, the orcs heard that humans were tearing at one another and began suspending their own internal disputes. Naga agents, elf scouts, church envoys, and northern nobles all reached the same conclusion from different directions. Human civil war had become an invitation hanging over the entire continent. Yet the invitation was arriving while Levi was deliberately making the orc plains less stable, not more. In response, the timing created exactly the kind of contradiction that made simple predictions useless. Anduin returned with the first fortress markers from Frostmoon, each one pushed farther toward future enemy movement routes. Back in control, Levi ordered deeper surveys beyond the first 100 kilometers whenever terrain allowed. A defensive line was usually measured by walls. Right as engineers began turning map marks into construction schedules, another message arrived from the Philo front. Gulvaig had forced the rebels to slow their northern advance, but Radiance-backed pressure was spreading elsewhere. On that front, the Ice and Snow Church had also begun moving openly. Noah had not entered one war, rather entering several wars whose borders were beginning to overlap. With that settled, Levi folded the report and looked north toward the mountains. By the time the next invasion came, he wanted the enemy to discover that Stormwind had already moved the battlefield. That order sounded aggressive, but the alternative was letting every neighboring faction schedule Stormwind's emergencies for it. Nelson sent word that the Church of Dawn could hold Philo for now, provided no second crisis opened behind them. Under pressure, Levi laughed at the condition because the entire continent seemed determined to create exactly that second crisis. For now, the Church of Radiance was arming rebels, while the Ice and Snow Church maneuvered elsewhere. Even the elves had started preparing for a conflict they had never chosen. Stormwind could not solve all of that, and Levi had stopped pretending it needed to. His task was simpler: make every hostile route toward his territory more expensive than the attacker expected. A new fortress cost stone, metal, labor, and months of wages before it ever fired a cannon. One failed invasion could repay that investment in captured weapons, corpses, prisoners, and years of breathing room. That arithmetic was ugly enough to make Anduin uncomfortable. Elsewhere, the younger lord wanted defenses that protected people. Between those instincts, Frostmoon Province was becoming something neither old nobles nor old maps had anticipated. It was no longer a border waiting for war to arrive. It was becoming a layered trap whose safest roads existed only on Stormwind's maps. What would happen when the orcs finally discovered those walls before they discovered the cities behind them? For now, Levi expected anger first, caution second, and a much more dangerous strategy after that. For now, the continent still believed Philo was the center of the crisis. Stormwind kept building while everyone else looked south. And somewhere beyond the wild mountains, the next war was already learning the shape of Levi's defenses. 2 years passed with Stormwind doing what it always did best. Under pressure, the northern fortresses moved deeper, the academy kept producing talent. Philo remained unstable, but Dawn's counterattack had recovered enough territory to stop the rebellion from rolling north unchecked. At that point, the largest rebel stronghold still bristled with copied magic cannons. Afterward, Levi recognized the irony immediately, because his own earlier moves had helped Radiance obtain the technology through Geralt's family. He did not waste time regretting it. Instead, he offered cannon technology to the Church of Dawn. If every major faction would eventually learn the weapon, Stormwind would profit by staying several generations ahead. By then, the decision surprised Nelson, who had expected Levi to guard the old secret much longer. At that point, Levi told him secrets aged faster during Continental War, especially once enemies already saw the basic design. One monopoly died on paper. Stormwind's workshops kept printing advantages somewhere else. Back home, Anduin delivered another report that made old standards feel almost meaningless. John had reached the 9th tier, becoming the latest saint produced by Stormwind's relentless training pipeline. His breakthrough came earlier than Levi expected, and the timing mattered more than the rank itself. John's reunion with his family had removed a weight that cultivation resources could never have dissolved for him. What happens when a man finally stops using guilt as an anchor? John answered by stepping into the saint realm and returning to alchemy instead of celebrating for long. Anduin was thrilled by the growing roster of Stormwind saints and began counting how many might mature within 2 decades. Levi cut the excitement short before pride could become planning based on yesterday's enemies. He warned Anduin that every great noble family was accelerating too. Families that hoarded resources for grandchildren might simply hand those resources to whoever conquered their castles first. That was the new arithmetic of nobility: spend now or finance the army that kills you later. Stormwind had accepted that rule, which was why its academy, army, navy. John soon proved the value of that pressure in a way nobody had expected. Levi found him staring into Imon's alchemical work so deeply that the room might as well have disappeared around him. Instead of touching him, Levi sealed the workshop and summoned Lilith to inspect the strange state. Lilith needed only a moment before her expression changed from curiosity to genuine surprise. She identified the talent as the heart of alchemy, a rare gift she had seen only among exceptional students of ancient wizards. Nearby, the talent did not hand John raw combat strength. For one long moment, Levi simply watched the old alchemist sit motionless behind the barrier. John had once been a 4th-tier mage trapped by regret. When he finally woke, Levi congratulated him before John even saw what had happened. Lilith explained the talent, and disbelief slowly gave way to the kind of hunger John usually reserved for impossible designs. Levi asked whether floating fortresses and dimensional warships still sounded ridiculous. John said they sounded like projects that needed better laboratories. That answer told Levi more than any oath about how completely the man's future had changed. Stormwind gained another saint that day. More importantly, it gained an alchemist who might someday touch the legendary realm. A month later, the household celebrated something far more dangerous. Angelis ended her seclusion and announced she was ready to face the legendary threshold. She had formed the rudiments of her path. Levi argued every risk he could think of, then stopped. He gave her a piece of undying ashes. Across the field, the ashes could preserve a life. They could also burn that life as fuel if used recklessly. Angelis accepted the emergency measure and chose an isolated island where water and fire could both be manipulated safely. After taking a legendary breakthrough resource, she spent days condensing the body and soul required for the next realm. And then the dark Calamity answered without giving Angelis another day to prepare. It did not send a symbolic trial or a weakened projection. A wounded steel rock demon named Paru crashed onto the island carrying the pressure of a true early-stage legend. Inside the region, the demon had survived another battle, but its injuries did not make its fists any less monstrous. Angelis met the first charge with layered magic, refusing to let a creature built for close combat control the distance. Paru kept pushing anyway, trusting the body that could turn ordinary saint attacks into background noise. What price did even a heavily funded mage face when the final bill came due? Angelis answered with resources she had spent years accumulating for exactly that impossible day. Water, fire, and storm magic changed the island until no piece of ground remained untouched by the fight. Paru called her methods shameless, which Angelis treated as proof that the inventory was working. By the second night, both sides were injured deeply enough that technique mattered less than stubbornness. From there, the steel rock demon still had the better body. Angelis still had more ways to refuse death. On the third day, Paru cornered her and believed the human mage had exhausted every hidden card. Angelis activated the undying ashes instead, choosing a dangerous reserve rather than surrender. Flame ran through her body, consuming lifespan. Paru's confidence vanished the instant he felt the change. Stormfire swallowed the demon at close range, hammering defenses already ruined by days of attrition. Soon, the demon endured until its body stopped answering, then fell hard enough to shake the broken island. Angelis won, but the ashes kept burning after the enemy died. That was the part Levi had feared most. She barely reached Stormwind through a spatial gate before consciousness abandoned her completely. Levi caught her as she fell and immediately stripped away the remaining undying ash effect. For 3 days, Angelis did nothing except sleep, while the household waited for her breathing to steady. Her victory had created a legend. The emergency measure had nearly turned that victory into a funeral. When Angelis finally woke, Levi asked about the opponent before asking about the reward. She described Paru, the riot's sanctuary, and the insultingly physical way the steel rock demon had tried to solve everything. Then she showed the change inside her fire, a metallic bronze quality that had not existed before the Calamity. In response, the reward made her flames feel heavier, tougher. Levi smiled because Angelis had once been the person protecting him from threats far above his rank. Now she had crossed another threshold first, and somehow that still felt reassuring rather than humiliating. On that front, the family barely finished recovering before Levi returned to a problem waiting on Green Island. Gloria and Fiza had served under contracts for years. He removed Fiza's contract and watched carefully for hatred, betrayal, or the first calculation toward escape. What he found was terror, caution, and a practical understanding that returning to the Orc plains offered no future. That reaction gave Levi the foundation for a larger recruitment plan. Instead of enslaving every Orc refugee, Stormwind could bind only the strongest leaders and control the rest through survival itself. Fiza thought Levi was planning to kill her. He calmed her by placing 3 expanded lightning towers on the table. Each tower had been rebuilt internally to carry thousands of people across long distances without exposing them on open roads. Fiza finally saw the assignment: retrieve her people before the next round of Orc politics swallowed them. She still asked Levi to place the slave mark back on her before leaving. That request disturbed Angelis more than any rebellion would have. Levi refused and told Fiza she had only one sensible plef to go. Fiza departed with the towers, knowing failure meant losing the only refuge willing to accept her tribe. Gloria received similar treatment, and both Foxwoman leaders ultimately chose to remain attached to Stormwind after release. For now, the arrangement solved more than one problem at once. Fox people could garrison exposed islands, reducing the burden on human troops. Elsewhere, the Naga would attack them regardless of species. A refugee tribe entered Stormwind as a liability. And then the Orc plains reacted to Alpha's new northern defenses. Orc vanguards reached positions they had once considered safe and found fresh human war fortresses waiting beyond the mountains. Harpies descended first and paid for the surprise in shattered wings under concentrated cannon fire. Ground troops tried next, only to discover the roads had been measured long before they marched onto them. The Beast God Temple faced an ugly choice: attack Alpha's fortress line now or preserve strength for Ron. A kobold shaman argued that Ron remained the greater strategic threat. Prescott wanted revenge on Stormwind, but even angry legends saw the difference between personal hatred and military timing. At that point, the temple ordered most forces redirected toward Ron and told the Alpha front to remain relatively quiet. That decision should have reduced danger around Stormwind. Instead, it irritated two factions that needed humans and orcs to keep killing each other. Shadow King Ika met with a steel rock demon from the Riot Sanctuary and proposed manufacturing the missing provocation themselves. Their plan was simple enough to be dangerous: use disguised legendary attacks to convince both sides the truce had already been broken. A human-looking legend would strike the orcs. An orc legend would raid Earl Arthur's territory. If both victims believed the other side escalated first, neither temple would need convincing afterward. How many wars begin because everyone reacts correctly to a lie? By then, the false flag operation worked almost too well. A legendary orc attacked Arthur's city and nearly broke its defensive array before Redmen arrived to stop the assault. Elsewhere, manipulated attacks convinced the orcs that human legends had violated the new restraint. Nearby, the fighting spread fast enough that neighboring powers began deploying their own legends just to prevent opportunistic invasions. Fusilas joined the northern battlefield. BlackRock sent its legends. Luxembourg reinforced its exposed border. Ron responded most aggressively, throwing major legendary strength against the orcs to keep pressure away from Alpha. Across the field, the northern continent became a map where every name had moved off its home square. That was exactly what Ghost King Nija wanted. With Alpha's legends concentrated near the frontier, Shadow Temple saw a narrow window around Levi. Helmet King Ika still hesitated because Gulveig Nelson. Nija pushed harder, arguing that chances this clean did not survive careful men for long. Then Sicily joined the pressure by sending Garibaldi and Apulia toward Philo, forcing Gulveig south. One dangerous variable disappeared from the rear exactly when Shadow Temple needed it gone. Inside the region, the Naga considered joining too, but the return of the deep-sea dark dragon made them unwilling to gamble their own legends. Shadow Temple did not need every faction to move. Levi sensed that the pattern around the battlefield felt wrong before he knew why. Too many independent enemies had chosen the same week to create exactly the same kind of pressure. Priest Nelson remained nearby, but even that reassurance started feeling less like safety and more like bait. From there, the Northern War had become loud enough to hide a knife. And somewhere beyond the front, two Shadow Kings finally began moving toward Levi. Nija and Ika had no reason to love each other. Soon, the Riot Sanctuary wanted the same result for different reasons. Their agents watched messenger routes, legendary deployments, and the timing of every reinforcement leaving Kanglin. Stormwind looked protected on paper. Paper did not show how many protectors were already fighting somewhere else. Levi kept moving between fronts because standing still would have made the assassins' calculations much easier. That mobility also made Nelson uneasy, since one wrong jump could separate Levi from every nearby ally. In response, the Shadow Kings counted on exactly that moment. For now, Levi continued acting as though the Northern War remained the only emergency worth watching. He reviewed fortress ammunition, checked troop movement, and sent Anduin orders that sounded almost boring. Underneath that routine, every spatial disturbance earned a second glance. What if the enemy did not want Stormwind at all? That question changed how Levi read every report from the front. On that front, the Orc offensive could be real and still function as camouflage for something smaller. Sicily's intervention could be opportunistic and still pull exactly the right legend away. Even Ron's support, however welcome, increased the number of moving pieces hiding hostile intent. Levi had survived enough conspiracies to distrust coincidences that helped his enemies too neatly. Then a spatial fluctuation appeared where no friendly signal should have existed. Nelson felt it too and immediately turned toward the same direction. For now, the noise of the Northern War continued beyond them, distant and enormous. Elsewhere, the real danger arrived almost silently, hidden beneath the noise of armies already fighting elsewhere. Two Shadow Kings had finally chosen their moment. Levi met the first incoming slash before anyone had time to call the attack an assassination. Under pressure, the assassination began with one clean move, a Shadow King cutting Levi away from his safest escape option. Davis was dragged off course, another spatial route collapsed. That timing told Levi everything he needed to know about how long Shadow Temple had prepared this trap. Nija praised him politely, because killing someone felt more satisfying when the victim saw the effort involved. Levi heard the compliment and started counting seconds instead of answering. Stormwind would report the attack. Kanglin would react. The problem was surviving until help could matter. Shadow Temple had anticipated that calculation and attacked before the first delay could become a plan. Nija opened with soul magic, aiming at the weakness most 9th tier fighters could never reinforce enough. At that point, the 9-colored tower answered, wrapping Levi's soul in ancient defenses while Lilith screamed warnings through the link. Extrasensory perception and deterrence pushed his mental strength higher, barely keeping the legendary attack from tearing through. Nija's expression changed when a saint remained conscious after something that normally ended the fight by itself. That should have bought Levi confidence. Instead, it convinced the Shadow King to stop using clever methods. Legendary shadow power flooded the area until every drifting thread carried enough corrosion to kill ordinary experts on contact. Levi released clones, rotated sacred techniques, and used dimensional space whenever the external battlefield became impossible to occupy. By then, the first minutes became a contest between Nija's overwhelming output and Levi's refusal to stay where that output landed. None of them expected the battlefield itself to become the next weapon. Nija shattered layers of space while Levi kept folding distance. Nearby, the pressure damaged dimensional space so badly that devour and interdimensional travel stopped responding. That loss should have removed Levi's greatest advantage. Instead, the collapsing environment forced his 3 knights' sacred techniques to finally stop behaving like separate abilities. Their structures began connecting under pressure, each correction borrowing something from the last failed escape. Nija noticed the change and became visibly furious. A human saint was using an assassination attempt as training material for a legendary combat technique. What kind of prey improved fast enough to make the hunter regret every extra minute? Across the field, the answer kept bleeding before him while blood Ember sealed wounds that ordinary bodies would never survive. Nija escalated again, abandoning caution and forcing both of them toward a small black hole tearing open nearby space. Levi tried to break away. The Shadow King deliberately blocked him. Nija no longer cared whether he survived the final exchange. The black hole dragged both fighters toward a region where spatial rules collapsed faster than either could repair. Levi warned Nija that losing another life in hell would leave only one more rebirth before death. Nija laughed at the threat and chose mutual destruction anyway. For one long moment, Levi stopped running and turned fully toward the enemy. If the Shadow King had decided to die here, Levi would at least make that decision expensive. Sacred techniques collided with legendary shadow magic while the black hole kept eating the battlefield around them. Nija eventually abandoned the damaged body and returned to hell. From there, the victory felt worthless for exactly 3 heartbeats. Levi still could not escape, and the black hole kept tearing every easy solution apart. Dimensional space had collapsed, the clones were failing. Awakening of Embers restored stamina, but unlimited endurance meant little. Then Levi changed the question, because running harder inside collapsing space would only delay death. He stopped asking how to flee the black hole, and started asking whether space could be folded away from it temporarily. Every attempt failed differently, which made each failure useful. Levi watched how edges bent, how rifts formed. Soon the prototype slowly became something deliberate rather than desperate. Blood ran down his arms while he traced the same patterns again and again through collapsing space. A mistake cost flesh. Blood Ember repaired the flesh. The next attempt cost less. That was the process. Pain converted into data faster than the black hole could finish killing him. Finally, one folded layer held long enough for Levi to place himself outside the strongest pull. Then another fold connected to it, creating the first reliable path through the surrounding spatial chaos. Void folding was born as a maze, a prison. Levi escaped before the structure collapsed behind him. In response, the black hole vanished into distance while the new technique remained inside his memory. He had entered the trap as a saint being hunted by legends. He left with the prototype of a legendary combat technique carved into his own survival instinct. Nelson saw him flying south and could not reconcile the murderous expression with the report that Levi had nearly died. On that front, the priest had expected a survivor to retreat towards safety. Levi was moving toward the next enemy instead. At Tulip territory, Jormungandr had already engaged the human legend Shadow Temple used as part of the assassination plan. Levi joined without ceremony and tested void folding against a target who had no idea what had happened elsewhere. For now, the legend discovered too late that visible distance no longer predicted where Levi's attacks would emerge. Jormungandr supplied raw legendary pressure, while Levi kept rearranging the routes through which that pressure arrived. Elsewhere, the trapped enemy died before reinforcements could turn the engagement into another prolonged siege. Levi collected the corpse and immediately asked where the second target had gone. His answer pointed towards Sicily's Garibaldi and Apulia, both still operating near Philo under the assumption Gulveig remained occupied. Revenge did not need speeches. It needed targets that were already exposed. Levi reached Philo and baited the two Sicilian legends toward open water. Davis appeared after the trap closed, turning the open sea into a battlefield the Sicilian legends had never chosen. Garibaldi and Apulia finally recognized why Levi had chosen open water. Under pressure, the battle ended with two noble families losing the legends their political ambitions depended on. Two corpses also meant two sources of energy essence. Gullveig stared at Levi when he reported both kills and briefly looked as though language had failed her. She had expected retaliation. She had not expected a saint to clean up two legends between other emergencies. Sicily received the news far less gracefully. Garibaldi's and Apulia's families had spent generations accumulating the resources needed to produce those experts. One afternoon erased that investment and turned their political leverage into inheritance disputes. At that point, the royal court immediately became quieter about pushing deeper into Alpha's problems. Levi returned north while the Orc plains continued burning from provocations he had started weeks earlier. By then, the Riot Sanctuary and Beast God Temple kept blaming each other. Dawn finally used the exhaustion to demand a ceasefire from the Orcs. Hamuel refused to surrender everything, but even the shaman recognized that another round of legendary fighting served nobody except outside enemies. Nearby, the agreement limited new fortress expansion near the mountains, a condition aimed directly at Alpha and Ron. Alpha accepted the immediate peace without pretending the restriction would remain comfortable forever. By early autumn, the Orc armies withdrew from the south. Stormwind had survived the invasion season, but Levi treated the result as a temporary pause rather than a resolution. Angelis, Panda, and Andreas reacted to void folding with the same mixture of disbelief and irritation. Angelis said most legends needed years to shape the prototype Levi had built while being dragged into a black hole. Panda looked more offended by the unfairness than impressed by the achievement. Levi answered by asking how long Shadow Temple would wait before sending something stronger. Across the field, the room went quiet as everyone pictured a stronger assassin arriving during Levi's future tribulation. This assassination had used multiple legends, false flag war, and carefully timed deployments just to isolate him. Failure would not make the next attempt smaller. What would Shadow Temple send when a first-stage legend was no longer enough to guarantee his death? Levi expected a second-stage assassin or someone prepared to die during his future tribulation. That possibility made waiting for the legendary breakthrough more dangerous than hunting the threat first. Panda offered to join immediately, because Panda considered most secret temple operations improved by overwhelming violence. Andreas agreed for less philosophical reasons, mainly because Levi's expeditions kept producing absurd gains. Levi refused both of them, insisting their own breakthroughs were worth more than one reckless expedition. Their own breakthroughs mattered more, and too many watchers already knew when Stormwind's legends left home. Angelis returned to Tulip to keep Sicily and Earth Church opportunists from mistaking absence for weakness. Anduin received orders to finish the remaining northern war fortresses before the next invasion cycle. Levi also told him to watch the newly settled Fox people without pretending trust had eliminated risk. Refugees could become citizens. They could also become infiltrators if nobody bothered to verify loyalty after the welcome. Stormwind would offer land and protection, but it would not confuse mercy with blindness. Then Levi took Davis into the wild mountains and started searching for Shadow Temple cells one by one. Thunder-patterned wolves led him toward Firebee Forest, where the poison alone could kill most intruders. That made it excellent cover for people who wanted nobody asking why humans entered. Levi sent a clone through Void Formless and found a hidden stronghold beneath the poisonous territory. Two 9th-tier enemies fell under subtle control before they could destroy evidence. Neither knew enough to identify the local legend, but one cell pointed toward another. Inside the region, the network had been designed so members could compromise only a few links before the rest disappeared. Levi kept cutting anyway, because even ignorant cells still revealed the shape of the network around them. Every destroyed cell narrowed the map, even when the prisoners knew almost nothing beyond their immediate orders. One intercepted mission drew his attention toward the Crouch family in Luxembourg. From there, the family had suffered strange internal changes similar to the Phoenix family before its betrayal in Alpha. That resemblance was not proof, but Levi had learned to investigate patterns before they became armies. A clone followed Crouch retainers and found too many of them drifting around known Shadow Temple routes under convenient excuses. Friends, treasure hunts, travel, family business. Each explanation worked alone and looked ridiculous when placed beside the others. Levi captured one 9th-tier member and used Dominator contract before the target could activate any suicide restriction. Soon, the contract hit a mental seal powerful enough to confirm someone had expected interrogation. Behind that seal sat orders tied directly to the Shadow Temple and the family's legendary ancestor. In response, the Crouch family had not merely been infiltrated. Its highest level had already chosen a side. That discovery gave Levi a target large enough to hurt Shadow Temple, and politically explosive enough to destabilize Luxembourg. He did not expose it, because a hidden traitor remained far more useful than a frightened fugitive. A traitor who believed nobody suspected him remained more useful than a traitor running for cover. Levi continued dismantling nearby cells, while the Crouch family unknowingly became the center of his next operation. Meanwhile, the Lord of Shadows learned how badly the previous assassination had failed. Ordinary agents would no longer be trusted with the task. Then came the order for a Shadow Guard, a second-stage legendary assassin raised under Hell's ruler. Ika hated the assignment because success would belong to the Guard. For now, the temple activated spies across Dawn territory and started tracking every friendly legend who might interfere. It also offered resources to other hostile churches, hoping fresh disturbances would keep potential reinforcements occupied. This time, Shadow Temple was preparing the battlefield before the assassin ever appeared. Levi was doing exactly the same thing from the other side. Neither knew the other had already found a traitor inside Luxembourg. And both sides were now building plans around the same Crouch family. Elsewhere, the Crouch Patriarch continued issuing orders as though his family remained merely another nervous Luxembourg house. That illusion gave Levi time to map servants, messengers, hidden routes. A public accusation would have created panic. Quiet surveillance created evidence and future leverage. For one tense stretch, both sides prepared an assassination while pretending no assassination was coming. Shadow Temple counted friendly legends around Levi and searched for the hour when those names disappeared elsewhere. Levi counted traitors around Shadow Temple and searched for the route its own assassin would trust most. What happens when two ambushes are built on top of the same secret? Neither plan could remain invisible forever, and the first mistake would decide whose trap became the battlefield. Under pressure, the Crouch family sat between them, rich enough to matter and compromised enough to become expendable. Levi had no sentimental attachment to preserving a noble house that had already sold its loyalty. Shadow Temple had even less reason to preserve pawns once their usefulness ended. By winter, every messenger leaving the family estate was being watched by someone who claimed not to be watching. Then one Crouch route changed without explanation. Levi followed the deviation and found the first real trail toward the legend hiding behind the network. Levi's counterattack landed harder than Shadow Temple expected. One corpse belonged to a hidden traitor. At that point, the nearby giant rock dragon watched Levi finish collecting spoils and became very interested in leaving peacefully. Its concern became obvious when Levi's gaze lingered on the legendary body for 1 second too long. Levi remembered the dragon had once helped Jormungandr and Panda, so he chose not to turn gratitude into energy essence. He warned the creature that the continent was becoming too unstable for casual hostility toward every passing human. By then, the dragon needed no second warning and seriously considered returning to the dragon realm. One potential corpse walked away. Shadow Temple received no such mercy. Deep in Sealand, Ika learned that Razo and Yaxley were dead and could barely explain how Levi found them. Nearby, the Lord of Shadows already knew enough to be furious. Levi had spread rumors about preparing for Tribulation, then used that false vulnerability to make the temple lower its guard. Razo had rushed toward the bait. Yaxley followed. Both became proof that the deception worked. Across the field, the Lord of Shadows ordered the remaining Noah network to stop taking unnecessary risks until stronger support arrived. Ika obeyed outwardly, but watching Levi erase cells one by one made patience feel increasingly like surrender. Levi entered the Principality of Sealand and began dismantling the network with deliberately irregular movement. One week he appeared near a baron's castle. The Rossi family fell after Levi confirmed its cooperation with Shadow Temple and uncovered a hidden outpost. A 9th-tier demon captured there became a map to 2 more compromised noble houses. Levi removed both families before their neighbors even saw what connected the arrests. 7 strongholds, 4 9th-tier enemies, and more than a dozen smaller traitorous families disappeared over months of hunting. That list sounded like justice to the church. To Levi it was also a shrinking search area. Every destroyed cell forced the surviving network to rely on fewer routes, fewer messengers. Ika could feel the walls closing without knowing which wall Levi would touch next. From there, the Shadow King asked Samur for guidance when direct orders from Hell became unreliable. Samur avoided giving a command that could later become his responsibility, but he offered a useful suggestion. If Levi was hunting inside Sealand, then Sealand itself should become too chaotic for any single hunter to control. Shadow Temple began pulling external factions toward the Principality, leaking opportunities to churches, cults, nobles. Earth Church interests moved. Witch Church agents appeared. Silent monastery observers followed the violence from safer distances. Local nobles armed themselves because nobody knew whether the next visitor was ally, assassin, missionary, or raider. What happens when a secret organization survives by making the entire country resemble one enormous crime scene? For a while, the strategy workedly as Shadow Temple hoped, burying every clean trail beneath fresh conflict. Soon, Principality of Sicily became crowded with enemies who hated each other almost as much as they hated Shadow Temple. Levi did not try to calm them. He upgraded Super Foresight instead, choosing better information over the impossible task of policing every faction. In response, the new reach extended his malicious perception across an enormous radius. Anyone thinking seriously about killing him risked announcing their direction before they had even chosen a route. Levi loved the effect immediately for one very selfish reason. He no longer needed to search every battlefield for profitable enemies. Within days, the Principality changed from a security problem into a hunting reserve. Levi publicized his presence just enough to make hostile saints and agents keep tracking him. Then he visited the places where that attention clustered. An Earth Church saint died after following what looked like an isolated target. 2 Gothic saints disappeared on another route. Witch Church operatives soon paid the same tuition. Levi deliberately slowed the pace because killing too quickly would teach everyone to stop coming. A chaotic battlefield produced more value when the prey still believed someone else would die first. Meanwhile, he kept the actual Shadow King alive because Ika remained the best lure in the Principality. Every faction watching Ika also watched Levi. Every faction watching Levi revealed another network around Ika. On that front, the local Dawn priest thought the situation had become impossible to manage. Levi quietly thought it had become easier to read. Then Ika finally reached the point where hiding felt more dangerous than acting. For now, the Shadow King assembled compromised nobles, remaining cells. Levi had been waiting for exactly that decision. Pastor Case expected a desperate defense of the Principality. Instead, he found himself standing inside a trap Levi had built around the people trying to trap him. Ika confronted Levi and accused him of dragging the chaos out merely to force the temple into the open. Levi did not bother denying it, because Ika finally deserved to understand how the trap had closed. Elsewhere, the Shadow King had spent months protecting a hidden network. Now too many hostile legends had moved close enough for Dawn and Levi to isolate them one by one. Under pressure, the melee exploded across Sicily with no clean front line. Earth Church warriors attacked Shadow Temple agents, while local nobles tried to protect estates from everyone. Levi used Super Foresight to step away from dangerous convergences and toward fights already close to breaking. He did not need to dominate every engagement. He needed to arrive when one side had already spent most of what kept it alive. That was how a chaotic melee became a feast of weakened targets instead of a heroic last stand. Each fallen saint became energy essence. Each exposed traitor removed another place where future assassins could hide. At that point, the Principality paid for the lesson with burned castles and empty roads. Levi's panel quietly counted gains while priests counted missing people. At the center of the disaster, Ika finally saw that delay had never protected him. Delay had given Levi more time to learn everyone around him. When the final confrontation arrived, Pastor Case still did not understand how much of the battlefield Levi had predicted. Ika did, and that difference became obvious. By then, the Shadow King tried to break away before Dawn reinforcements and local legends completed the encirclement. Void folding cut the route into pieces, turning one retreat corridor into several wrong directions. Ika burned through shadow techniques and still found Levi appearing where no visible path should have connected. Nearby, the local legends stopped questioning the method once they saw the temple's commander bleeding. What remained of the Shadow Network collapsed with its leader. Ika died knowing Hell would not restore the strategic position his failure had destroyed on Noah. Across the field, the political cleanup proved almost as ugly as the battle. A Sealand legend named Flint had been secretly aligned with Shadow Temple and tried to flee when the network fell apart. Levi killed him, then forced the surrounding nobles to confront what their own houses had tolerated. Some demanded proof loudly until they stood close enough to Levi to remember how many legends had just died. Pastor Case became the reluctant bridge between accusation and investigation. They traveled to Solon City and found the compromised family already attempting to escape south. That flight ended the argument faster than any confession could have. Sealand's nobles had wanted a clean story with outsiders to blame. Instead, they discovered one of their own legends had helped build the knife inside their country. Inside the region, the revelation cost titles, estates, marriages, and decades of political trust in a single afternoon. Levi had entered Sealand hunting Shadow Temple. He left the principality with its noble hierarchy permanently more suspicious of itself. In Hell, the Lord of Shadows reacted by ordering a strategic withdrawal from Dawn-controlled territory. Spark, the last legend still functioning safely on Noah, received orders to hide rather than pursue revenge. From there, the temple would rebuild, but it would rebuild dispersed and quiet. 5 legendary breakthrough treasures and dozens of cultivation resources were allocated to restore the network through new vessels. A second-stage shadow guard named Ignaz was prepared for transfer, yet even he was told not to attack Levi immediately. That restraint said more about Levi's new reputation than any public title could have. Shadow Temple no longer saw killing him as an ordinary assassination problem. It saw him as a variable dangerous enough to postpone until somebody else weakened him first. Levi responded by doing something the Lord of Shadows had not expected. He sent clones into hell, turning the Temple's own rebirth system into another place where enemies could be harvested. Ghost King and Claw King had lost too much. One clone struck a Shadow King hideout, killed the target, and grabbed several breakthrough treasures before dissipating. Another reached a target and destroyed both a legendary undead and the weakened Shadow King protecting it. Summer arrived too late and found only corpses plus the fading trace of a clone. The insult mattered almost as much as the losses. Shadow Temple had failed to kill Levi on Noah, then watched Levi visit hell to finish enemies who thought rebirth meant safety. The Shadow Domain entered high alert, forcing other infiltrators to flee or die. Levi kept one clone inside anyway, because weakened Shadow Kings remained exceptionally profitable targets. Then malicious perception pointed toward a familiar enemy, instead of another Shadow King. Auduras had reappeared near the border between the Ice Wasteland and the Elf Forest. That location made no sense unless Auduras possessed support the elves themselves had failed to detect. The elves had hunted the Lich for generations, yet Auduras repeatedly returned from territory they controlled most heavily. What if the life box had never been hidden in the wasteland at all? Levi followed the malicious signal with a clone while keeping his main body near the western coast. The trail crossed toward the Elf Forest, where humans were already unwelcome because of tensions with Radiance. No corpse or visible hideout appeared at the end of the signal. The malice remained fixed in empty space. That contradiction gave Levi the answer, or at least the first explanation that fit every impossible detail. Auduras was hiding inside a spatial secret realm layered over territory the elves believed they saw completely. Only an expert of extraordinary level could have built something concealed that well. Levi remembered the legendary third-stage elf connected to the Lich's history and immediately became more cautious. A secret realm could explain how Auduras kept returning after the elves destroyed body after body. It could also explain why centuries of pursuit had never exposed the life box. The western sea nearby was ruined, empty, and perfect for staging support without attracting ordinary traffic. Levi moved the main body there while the clone circled the invisible boundary of the hidden realm. No treasure had appeared in Auduras's abandoned laboratory, only experiments and corpses. That absence now made sense if the important assets were stored somewhere the body itself did not need to visit often. And then the malicious signal shifted slightly. Levi stopped moving, because the smallest reaction might reveal how much the hidden observer already knew. The clone remained outside. The main body waited over the dead western sea. Somewhere between them, an invisible door was protecting the secret Auduras had survived centuries to hide. For one tense stretch, nothing crossed the surface of that invisible boundary. The western sea remained empty enough that even gulls seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. Levi could have forced the issue with raw spatial attacks. Instead, he marked the location and began comparing every clue gathered from Auduras, sugared Alice. The life box had always been the real target, not the body stitched together around it. Find the box, and centuries of Auduras surviving destruction finally ended. Miss the box, and every victory merely financed another resurrection. That difference turned one invisible patch of air into a resource worth more than several noble estates. Levi ordered the clone to continue observing rather than enter blindly. The decision felt cautious, which usually meant Panda would complain the moment he heard about it. Levi preferred that complaint to explaining why a clone had vanished inside a third-stage Legends trap. The next step would require preparation, not momentum from Sealand's victory. Stormwind needed supplies, spatial tools, and a plan for whatever protected the secret realm from the inside. Auduras had spent centuries proving that ordinary pursuit could not solve him. Levi intended to approach the problem like an inheritance dungeon instead of a fugitive chase. What kind of treasure justified hiding a Lich's immortality behind elven territory and ancient spatial engineering? The answer could be only a life box. Or it could be the reason someone had helped create that life box in the first place. Levi left the clone watching the invisible door and turned the main body back toward Stormwind. The hunt for Auduras had just stopped being a side mission. The invisible barrier around Auduras opened after Levi spent days probing its spatial seams instead of attacking blindly. The Lich froze when Levi stepped through. Auduras tried negotiation first, offering treasure and peace. Sugared's appearance ended the performance because Auduras recognized immediately how his life box secret had escaped. The moment Auduras recognized another Lich, he saw exactly which secret had betrayed him. Auduras grabbed the life box and fled toward the exit as if carrying his own future. Levi stopped him with Hand of Chaos before the Lich crossed half the room. Auduras hung in the air staring at Levi while the life box floated beyond his reach. The stitched body had survived elves' legends and repeated destruction. None of that mattered once someone else physically controlled the anchor that made resurrection possible. Levi asked whether Auduras preferred service or final death. There was no need to spend a Dominator contract slot afterward. A mental array placed directly inside the life box gave Levi enough control to detect betrayal before Auduras could act on it. The arrangement was efficient in a way only liches could make possible. Auduras had spent centuries protecting one object. Levi turned possession of that object into an employment contract. Then came the inventory, and the hidden realm started looking less like refuge than accumulated capital. The life box was valuable, but the hidden realm contained enough ancient resources to make Levi briefly forget the chase. A tortoise king fruit could extend lifespan by centuries. Heart of the Wind Feather offered a legendary wind breakthrough root. Auduras had hoarded materials because liches did not consume cultivation resources the same way living experts did. That made his secret realm less like a home and more like a bank whose owner never needed withdrawals. Levi had arrived hunting immortality. He left owning the vault. The gains also changed his next decision. Nightly legendary Tribulation could no longer be postponed indefinitely. Levi chose an unnamed island deep in the Western Sea where collateral damage would kill nobody except whatever the Calamity brought. Davis waited thousands of kilometers away, so its presence could not influence the coming Dark Calamity. Levi sealed his magical power as well. Panda received a warning through the life contract and responded with exactly the amount of concern hidden beneath insults Levi expected. Then Levi broke the last 9th tier barrier of the Night Path. The transformation lasted 17 days, long enough to make every comparison with Panda deeply uncomfortable. Every day his body became stronger, and every day made the approaching calamity look more unreasonable. Panda's transformation had taken far less time, and Panda had nearly died during the final trial anyway. What kind of calamity answered a body that required more than twice as long to finish changing? Levi used the following days to learn the new strength before the sky answered for him. Thunderclouds gathered over the island until daylight disappeared beneath a ceiling of destructive energy. The first strike already numbed his arms. That alone told him the last strike would be obscene. Bolt after bolt descended while Levi relied on nightly power alone, refusing every magical shortcut that could contaminate the Tribulation. The island cracked, boiled, and slowly stopped resembling land. Each wave strengthened until Blood Ember spent more time repairing damage than Levi spent avoiding it. Then the final lightning pillar began forming. Super Foresight screamed danger so constantly that warning itself stopped being useful. Levi released every reserve stored through Devour the Sea and still felt the incoming power dwarf his defense. Moments later, the sky dropped what looked like several previous tribulations compressed into one column. The lightning entered muscle, bone, blood, and the battle aura seed at the same time. Blood Ember rebuilt tissue as fast as destruction stripped it apart. Soon even that balance failed, forcing Levi to spend life force faster than Blood Ember could repair him. Levi pulled life force through the contract with Panda, spending the bear's vitality. The connection kept him alive until Panda approached the limit as well. That was when Levi made the ugliest decision of the entire Tribulation. He dragged the remaining lightning into his own dimensional battle aura seed. If the space shattered, he would lose an ability. The island disappeared beneath the last blast. When the clouds finally broke, only the battle aura seed remained floating above the sea with destruction raging inside it. A lightning elemental spirit rushed toward the seed, believing the exhausted remnant would be easy prey. The seed expanded instead, opening internal space wide enough to swallow the lightning spirit whole. Space unfolded across thousands of kilometers and swallowed the elemental spirit along with the remaining Tribulation power. Inside, Levi's dispersed form began rebuilding around the very energy that had almost erased him. The lightning did not vanish, because the Tribulation had already fused itself into Levi's nightly path. It became part of a new destructive power fused with his nightly system. Levi returned from the Tribulation with a legendary body and something more dangerous than ordinary battle aura. Destruction could now be channeled through both attacks and weapons. It still needed nightly power to function, which kept it from becoming a universal solution. Even so, the new effect made several old techniques feel like weapons rebuilt around a larger engine. What had nearly killed Levi became the upgrade enemies would meet next. The panel also transformed several physical talents as the legendary body stabilized. Black armor changed most dramatically, lifting raw defense high enough to challenge complete first-stage legends directly. Speed, strength, recovery, and spatial endurance rose together instead of forcing Levi to choose one defensive answer. A catastrophe that consumed an island became a collection of permanent statistics before the sea finished cooling. Levi tested the gains cautiously, because newly acquired destructive power made accidents much more expensive. After the Tribulation, Levi crossed the Lesser Hengduan Mountains and entered the Radiant Kingdom of Carlister. Radiance had pulled troops east against the elves, leaving several legendary houses exposed along a tense frontier. Levi needed 3 legendary energy essences before his next talent upgrade, so the opportunity looked almost arranged for him. His first target was the Winston family legend, stationed near the elven front with no idea another human was hunting him. Levi struck fast, killed the knight, and vanished before nearby elves understood why a radiant noble had suddenly fallen. Carlister blamed the frontier crisis on elven pressure and began searching for a mysterious human attacker. Before investigators found a trail, the Wilfred family lost its own legendary knight in another sudden ambush. 2 noble houses lost generations of cultivation investment before the royal court understood the killings shared one hunter. The surviving legends pulled toward the royal city, forcing Levi to stop hunting isolated family targets. Then Radiance sent a perfected first-stage knight to investigate the murders. Levi treated the reinforcement as the missing 3rd essence and intercepted him before Carlister legends could provide support. 3 clones kept the perfected knight occupied while Levi used destructive power to finish the fight quickly. Within 1 month, 3 Carlister legends were dead, including the investigator Radiance had sent to stop the killer. The Church of Radiance answered by dispatching a 2nd-stage knight, exactly the escalation Levi had expected. Elven leaders saw the same escalation and assumed Radiance might use the murders as justification for open war. That fear proved justified as border clashes expanded and both sides committed more legendary strength. Levi left the region before the 2nd-stage hunter arrived, allowing Radiance and the elves to keep blaming each other. The massacre produced 3 energy essences. The diplomatic fallout produced an entire new battlefield without further spending. Levi used the gains to raise absolute defense into the legendary realm. Black armor improved the most, giving his body protection comparable to a complete 1st-stage legendary defender. Backlash also became far safer to use because one direct hit was less likely to kill him before reflection mattered. The upgraded legendary body pushed raw defense high enough that ordinary 1st-stage enemies could no longer rely on burst damage. Only after locking in those gains did Levi return to Stormwind and visit old Charlie. Age had become the one enemy the old retainer could not outwork, so Levi handed him the Tortoise King fruit. Within minutes, Charlie returned to a middle-aged appearance while wind elemental power stabilized throughout his body. One fruit bought centuries of lifespan and reopened a cultivation path everyone had quietly considered finished. Levi told him to aim for the 9th tier and gradually train younger people to handle household responsibilities. Charlie asked to recall Lucien from the Navy and keep family service passing from father to son. Levi refused, saying Lucien had naval talent and deserved a career chosen by ability rather than inheritance. Charlie accepted reluctantly, because another century gave him enough time to train assistants from Stormwind Academy. The northern frontier showed the same transition from personal loyalty towards systems that could outlive individuals. 9 forward war fortresses now sat inside the Wild Mountains, pushing Stormwind defenses farther north than older maps suggested. Rear legions supported those positions while the peninsula and original castles became deeper layers instead of first contact. Stormwind fielded an army approaching 200,000, a scale once reserved for kingdom-level campaigns. Philo refugees supplied part of the new population, turning another kingdom collapse into workers, soldiers and future taxpayers. Sugared shipyards had also produced Stormwind-owned 9th-tier alchemical warships, though materials limited the first batch. John Alchemical Fortress project approached completion, promising another defensive layer beyond ordinary walls and artillery. Levi gave John Audura's stitching research and asked whether legendary body engineering could improve human alchemical prosthetics. John accepted the problem immediately, seeing a path from undead body horror toward equipment that could restore wounded veterans. Moments later, Anduin arrived with news that changed Levi's sense of time more effectively than any prophecy. Angela was pregnant, turning one ordinary family announcement into the beginning of Stormwind's first true succession generation. Levi had spent decades measuring progress through ranks, fortresses, wars, and technologies. Now he was about to become a grandfather. The legendary who had survived cosmic lightning looked more unsettled by family succession than tribulation. He ordered Angelis home immediately and sent Andreas south to cover Tulip. Anduin left smiling in a way battle reports had never produced. The Storm family was moving from survival into inheritance. That transition should have felt peaceful, but the rest of Noah had chosen a very different direction. Fresh messages from the southern continent arrived almost immediately and shattered the brief sense of peace. Political conflict there was accelerating, and the Church of Radiance appeared increasingly willing to use the chaos as leverage against Dawn. Pope Sullivan's movements became harder to predict while foreign churches repositioned under the cover of local wars. Dawn leadership feared the southern crisis was designed partly to hold its strongest people away from Noah. Priest Reyes began recalling hidden assets and warning every Dawn-aligned kingdom to prepare for wider conflict. The Church of Truth received similar warnings. Nelson read the message in Alpha while the next orc invasion was already approaching from the north. Human civil war in the south, orc pressure in the north, Radiance maneuvering between them. What happens when every enemy schedules its opportunity for the same season? Nelson summoned Alpha's great nobles and ordered emergency planning before the answer arrived on the battlefield. Stormwind had just gained a grandfather, a legendary lord, new fortresses, and new alchemical projects. None of those achievements bought exemption from the age of chaos gathering around them. Canglin's emergency meeting did not begin with strategy so much as a list of disasters already moving toward each other. The royal family wanted numbers. Nelson wanted contingency plans. The nobles wanted guarantees nobody present could honestly provide. Levi listened while thinking about how many of those guarantees could be replaced by logistics instead. A fortress could not promise survival, but it could buy hours. A reserve legion could not promise victory, but it could keep one broken front from becoming three. A trained hare could not promise stability. Stormwind had built its recent growth around that quieter purpose. It was building enough redundancy that catastrophe had to kill several systems before the territory stopped functioning. The same principle now mattered to Alpha as a kingdom. If the south collapsed, northern roads needed independent supply. If the orcs pushed through, southern nobles needed armies that could move without waiting for Canglin to solve every decision. If Radiance attacked Dawn directly, local commanders needed authority before messengers crossed half the continent. Levi argued for preparation that assumed communications would fail at the worst possible moment. Some nobles disliked the pessimism until Nelson asked what part of recent history suggested optimism had been cheaper. The room became much quieter after that. By sunset, orders were moving toward Frostmoon, Tulip, the ducal armies, and the church garrisons. Stormwind had spent years learning how to survive when nobody came to help. Now Alpha was being forced to learn the same lesson at kingdom scale, and the deadline was no longer measured in generations. It was measured in how quickly the next 3 wars could arrive together. Canglin spent 3 days changing the same war plan. The final structure divided Alpha into northern and southern defense zones. In the north, the new Wild Mountain Fortress line became the first shield instead of a distant experiment. Behind it sat the older border defenses, then noble heartlands prepared to absorb whatever broke through both layers. Mobile armies from Fox and Leon remained uncommitted, so a crisis could be answered before it became an evacuation. The southern plan mirrored the same logic across Philo, Jonathan territory, and Alpha's own homeland defenses. Reserve forces stayed closer to the center because nobody could predict which front would fail first. Levi supported the structure but insisted Stormwind's legends remain flexible rather than trapped inside ceremonial assignments. Nobody objected much after remembering a 9th-tier Levi had already forced veteran legends into impossible fights. His current legendary body made the same argument without needing a speech. Meanwhile, Dawn solved one naval problem with an agreement nobody in Alpha had expected. The deep-sea dark dragon Krakado accepted payment to block the Naga from exploiting the human civil war for several years. 3 legendary Naga tested the arrangement almost immediately and found Krakado waiting with the 4-eyed giant shrimp. Krakado told them the deal did not make him human, only temporarily expensive to challenge. One Naga started pushing the issue until the killing intent of a second-stage dragon ended the argument. They withdrew while pretending patience had been their idea all along. The 4-eyed giant shrimp celebrated too early and asked whether the Naga would stay away for years. Krakado laughed at the optimism, because the Naga had not suddenly become patient or trustworthy. He expected them to gather intelligence, wait for weakness. The deal had purchased time, not loyalty. How much was one quiet coastline worth? For Alpha, the answer was whatever Krakado had demanded. The orc vanguard reached the Wild Mountain defenses soon afterward and tried a different kind of economy. Cannon fodder races marched first, meant to exhaust ammunition before elite units entered range. Alpha commanders refused the obvious trade and reduced heavy bombardment against expendable targets. Infantry, crossbows and layered fortifications handled the first waves while the largest cannon batteries stayed quiet. The main orc army arrived after days of testing and still refused to commit everything at once. Levi already knew why through Ursus, whose position inside the Beast God Temple kept exposing strategic intent. The Beast God Temple wanted to measure human strength. That caution gave Alpha an opportunity to reverse the test. Levi proposed a sudden counterattack before the larger orc formations finished assembling behind the vanguard. If the orcs wanted information, Alpha would give them casualties instead. Northern nobles agreed because every dead elite now meant fewer enemies standing before the fortresses later. The first counterattack hit while the orcs still believed humans intended to remain behind their walls. Artillery opened only after mobile formations were already committed, turning the fallback routes into crowded kill zones. Knight units struck exposed flanks while prepared mages targeted shamans trying to stabilize the line. The orc command recovered quickly, but the value of surprise had already been collected. One veteran would call it a successful sortie. Then the legendary battlefield erupted, turning the northern test into a direct contest between the strongest names present. An orc legend fell early enough to shock both armies. That death changed the tempo immediately, because every commander revised the risk of continuing the same plan. Orc legends became cautious, human legends became aggressive. The same success also convinced enemies elsewhere that waiting would only make Levi harder to deal with. Human civil war accelerated in Philo, while the Northern Front was still absorbing the consequences. Earth Church forces expanded their commitment, turning what had begun as a political rebellion into open religious warfare. Sicilian interests pushed at sea, and the southern battlefield started consuming Alpha reserves originally meant for emergencies. Then BlackRock sent a message nobody wanted to receive. Its northern defenses were cracking under orc pressure. Alpha had just enough reserve strength to help, and nowhere near enough to make the help painless. The kingdom sent a large reinforcement anyway. That decision stabilized the line temporarily and weakened every reserve table in Kanglan simultaneously. A crisis avoided in one country became a shortage in another ledger. The orcs saw the strain and doubled down against Alpha's wild mountain defenses. Millions of troops pressed the northern theater, with elite formations protected by powerful shaman units. Magic cannons still mattered, but sacrificial buffs and dispersed formations reduced the damage each volley could achieve. The siege stopped looking like one battle and became a daily industry of replacing bodies, shells, food. Even Stormwind's advantages felt less like superiority than the ability to lose more slowly. Then the orcs revealed hidden legends, using a demiplane to turn an ordinary engagement into coordinated assassination. Behemoth Esterka emerged from a demiplane and struck Angelis while Kobold Prescott joined another coordinated attack. The move tried to collapse several legendary fights at once before Alpha could rebalance partners. Angelis answered with Steel Furnace, trapping her attacker long enough to break away instead of accepting the intended duel. Redman used Lightning Leap to cross between battles and rescue Tyrannoville before the orcs finished their encirclement. Levi created clones and occupied 2 complete behemoths himself. Soon every major legend on the field was locked into a fight nobody could leave cheaply. Levi held 2 behemoths. Tyrannoville endured 2 werewolf legends. Angelis and Redman handled multiple opponents together. The orcs had created a superior local concentration and still failed to produce the quick kill they needed. That failure mattered because the longer the legendary battle lasted, the more prepared Alpha's troops became below. Neither side wanted to keep gambling complete legends on marginal gains. The battlefield settled into a vicious stalemate rather than a collapse. War paused for nobody at home, and the next message reached Levi while the northern front still burned. A message reached Levi that Angela had gone into labor in Kanglan. He sent a clone immediately and delivered Anduin to the church compound. Anduin arrived with all the composure of a battlefield commander completely defeated by one closed door. Nelson personally supervised the delivery, which was more protection than most princes received during coronations. More than an hour later, a baby's cry reached the corridor. Anduin became a father, forgetting every military report in the corridor for one completely unguarded moment. Levi became a grandfather while another legendary battle was already threatening to restart hundreds of kilometers away. The child carried fire affinity, continuing the strong elemental pattern running through Angelis' bloodline. Levi barely had time to hold him before distant danger pulled the clone's attention back toward war. That was Stormwind's era in one image, a newborn surrounded by priests. The northern front slowed with winter, but the southern front did the opposite. Philo's land war intensified as fresh religious forces entered the conflict. At sea, Alpha and Sicily moved from probing engagements toward battles large enough to involve hundreds of warships. The kingdom of Alpha was now fighting a northern land war, southern land war. What happens when a reserve army has already been spent before the enemy chooses the next emergency? King Thompson asked the great nobles almost that exact question when the newest reports reached Kanglan. Some demanded BlackRock support be recalled immediately. Others wanted coastal positions abandoned to preserve forces for the core kingdom. A few nobles argued that Philo should be left to its own fate. Levi opposed the retreat logic, because abandoning neighbors did not erase the armies currently fighting there. It merely moved those armies closer to Alpha's borders with momentum intact. The more useful solution was to change what Alpha expected to gain from continuing the Philo war. If the kingdom was paying soldiers, ships, artillery. Levi began discussing something that would once have sounded outrageous. Alpha should prepare to annex territory in Philo rather than restore the old order unchanged. The room reacted exactly as expected, with old nobles hearing expansion and Levi hearing repayment for continuing the war. Traditionalists called the idea expansion during disaster. Every fortified city Alpha held required food, pay, replacement equipment, and noble casualties. Returning all of that land afterward would convert a military investment directly into somebody else's recovery. The argument became harder to dismiss the longer the casualty reports grew. Shadow Temple exploited the uncertainty from another direction. Instead of attacking, its agents encouraged professionals, minor nobles. They sold safety elsewhere and described the current war as proof that Kanglin had already lost control. The campaign worked because fear needed less evidence than loyalty. Families began moving wealth, servants, and children toward routes promising neutral territory. Every skilled professional who left represented years of training paid for by the society they were abandoning. A refugee caravan looked harmless. 100 such caravans could hollow out a kingdom without winning one battle. Dawn priests worked desperately to suppress the panic while also managing military fronts already consuming their attention. Levi treated the migration campaign as another battlefield, one where information mattered more than cannon range. Stormwind's reputation for stability became a strange advantage. That created its own political problem, since accepting everyone could look like Levi benefiting from the kingdom's crisis. He told Anduin to prioritize useful professionals, families with clean records. No emergency would turn the territory into a market where frightened nobles bought immunity from ordinary rules. Meanwhile, Radiance struck harder elsewhere, ensuring Dawn could not simply concentrate all strength around Alpha. The Church of Truth came under pressure. Blackrock still needed troops. Philo still needed troops. Alpha's northern fortresses still needed troops. The strategic map had become 3 front lines connected by one shrinking pool of reserves. Levi proposed using Stormwind's mobility, clones, and intelligence to behave like a 4th resource rather than another fixed army. He could appear where an enemy expected a gap, kill the leadership, then leave. That strategy would not hold territory by itself. It could buy the armies holding territory enough breathing room to survive. And if the opportunity came, Levi intended to make Philo's political map pay for every breath Alpha purchased there. By the end of the meeting, annexation had stopped sounding impossible. It had started sounding like the price of continuing the war. The proposal did not pass cleanly, and Levi had never expected it to. Several houses feared annexation would trap Alpha inside Philo's endless factional disputes instead of ending them. Others worried that Dawn would oppose any land grab made. Levi answered that ownership could be negotiated after survival. A city defended by Alpha soldiers today would remember who actually kept the gates closed tomorrow. That memory could become treaties, noble replacements, tax rights, or outright annexation depending on how Philo collapsed. King Thompson asked whether Levi truly believed the old Philo royal order could be restored. Levi said the old order had already failed the moment its strongest houses invited outside churches to settle succession with legends. Putting the same structure back together would merely rebuild the conditions for another collapse. Nelson disliked the politics but could not argue with the military logic. Dawn needed a stable southern buffer more than it needed nostalgia for a border that no longer protected anyone. The meeting ended without a final territorial map. It did end with Alpha preparing to treat every future advance in Philo as something that might become permanent. That changed how quartermasters counted supplies and how nobles evaluated casualties. The war was no longer purely defensive. It had become a competition over who would own the ruins after the churches finished breaking them. What would Philo's surviving nobles do once they noticed Alpha was no longer planning to leave empty-handed? Levi expected some to resist, some to bargain. That uncertainty was dangerous, but it also gave Stormwind room to recruit useful people from collapsing houses. The same chaos creating refugees could create officers, mages, craftsmen. One failed kingdom was becoming another territory's labor market before the crown had even fallen. Levi hated the waste and still intended to use it. He left Kanglin with orders for Stormwind to prepare both military reinforcements and settlement capacity. The next campaign would be fought with fortresses in front and population ledgers behind them. And somewhere in Philo, families who still believed Alpha came only to help were about to discover the price had changed. The Southern War had stopped being somebody else's emergency and become Alpha's unfinished acquisition. Alpha's promise of military rewards changed the national mood faster than any speech about duty could have managed. The royal proclamation opened more resources to civilians and expanded academy access. It never said Philo's land would become prizes. Lower nobles heard the implication anyway, because families close to the great houses saw what military rewards truly meant. Families that had considered the war a slow national suicide saw fertile estates beyond the southern front. Recruitment offices filled because ambition could motivate men who had stopped responding to patriotic fear. The Church of Dawn recognized exactly what Canglin had done and complained that Alpha was forcing approval after creating facts. Nelson laughed because he also recognized Levi's style in the maneuver. Martinez worried a stronger Alpha might become difficult for the Church after the war. Nelson asked whether a weak Alpha surviving on charity would be safer for anyone once the Continental Order broke completely. Territory was one concern, survival came first. Dawn leadership eventually supported the military push. That support reached the northern battlefield at the perfect time. A second-stage legendary mage arrived, removing the last reason Levi had to hide how much stronger he had become. When the orcs pressed again, Levi used void folding to separate a behemoth from its battle mount. Without the paired coordination, the famous orc monster became a much easier target. Levi killed it before reinforcements could restore the formation. Vestani went berserk and called more legends toward him, including kobold priests and veteran fighters. Alpha's people panicked when Levi became the center of a 5-legend encirclement. Levi told them to keep fighting their own battles. He had spent the previous weeks pretending to be merely difficult. Now there was no reason to continue the performance. Destructive power blasted a perfected behemoth backward before the surrounding orcs finished forming their attack. Void folding swallowed the angles of 2 kobold priests and prevented their spells from arriving together. 2 veteran legends disappeared into Levi's expanded demiplane, where clones waited away from the main battlefield. The remaining behemoth discovered that 5 attackers had somehow become several isolated duels. What was a numerical advantage worth when Levi could decide which part of the group existed beside him at any moment? The orcs finally saw the answer after another complete legend died. Hamuel sent an urgent message to the Beast God Temple and asked for far stronger support. More orc legends arrived, including a second-stage behemoth whose first reaction was rage at the dead members of his tribe. Before the new battle could begin, another second-stage figure stepped forward from the human side. Simpson carried authority from the Church of Dawn and a reason neither side could ignore. The Church of Truth was under a major radiant assault. Hamuel had entered a faith-backed agreement, making renewed fighting expensive in a way ordinary treaties were not. The furious behemoth accused the shaman of wagering the beast god's faith itself. Hamuel replied that watching every orc legend die one by one would damage the temple more directly. Tension held while the battlefield held enough power to restart a continental war and nobody moved. Levi stood covered in the residue of several battles. Alpha's experts had always known he was strong. They had not expected a newly advanced legend to make complete first-stage enemies look expendable. The orcs had expected a dangerous human lord. They now saw someone who could turn groups of legends into isolated resources. The ceasefire finally held, not because hatred disappeared. Orc armies began withdrawing under Hamuel's orders. Alpha cheered, but Levi immediately asked where the kingdom was weakest next. The answer remained Philo, where the southern front kept absorbing soldiers faster than Alpha could comfortably replace them. Radiance had shown far more strength against the Church of Truth than most Dawn leaders expected. Several second-stage experts were already committed there, and nobody believed that represented the Church's full reserve. Dawn could not send everything south without leaving Alpha open to orcs, Naga, Sicily, and hidden cults. Priest Riaz explained the situation and asked Alpha's legends to choose which theaters they could cover themselves. Levi proposed leaving enough strength in the north to punish renewed orc aggression, while sending mobile support toward Philo. He also wanted Stormwind Saints deployed instead of sitting behind safe walls for another year. The territory now had enough 9th-tier experts that experience, not rank, was becoming the limiting resource. War could provide that experience at a cost nobody enjoyed counting. Levi sent selected saints south under commanders who would force them to solve problems instead of merely follow legends. Meanwhile, half-elf leaders requested relocation after growing pressure threatened their old settlement. Levi accepted and placed them in forest territory where their culture could survive without isolating them from Stormwind's protection. A small migration solved a humanitarian risk and added skilled population to land that farmers rarely used. Sugard woke from another period of adjustment and immediately displayed the frightened loyalty Auduras found deeply educational. The older Lich watched another undead expert obey Levi without hesitation and reconsidered every fantasy about betrayal. That private lesson cost Stormwind nothing, while making Auduras far more careful about the limits of his own freedom. The sea crisis cost more, because hundreds of ships could vanish before one wrong assumption reached Canglin. Adrian warned Alpha's naval commanders that Sicily's scattered royal fleet looked too convenient to be accidental. The Sicilian navy had centuries of institutional experience, and no reason to fall apart completely because of one weather event. Alpha's admirals saw a rare chance to annihilate the royal fleet and assembled before Tulip forces could catch up. Adrian's prediction proved correct, and the supposed weather disaster revealed itself as the opening move of a deliberate encirclement. Sicilian ducal fleets converged while the supposedly scattered royal ships regrouped, creating a counter-encirclement around Alpha's navy. Tulip split forces, one group retreating toward a safer line. Then communication with West and Jormungandr failed. That was the moment Adrian stopped hoping the battle was only naval. What kind of trap removes the legends first and leaves hundreds of warships to discover the answer afterward? Levi arrived before the encirclement finished closing. Clones, Auduras, and disguised undead made several unrelated factions appear to be entering the sea battle. Confusion spread across the legendary battlefield, because nobody could tell which newcomer intended to help which fleet. Levi exploited that hesitation and killed an Earth Church legend, before the others recognized the true target. 2 clones were lost during the operation, but the casualty belonged to a body Levi could replace. The dead legend belonged to a church that had spent generations creating him. Adrian used the disruption to pull Alpha's navy away from the worst of the encirclement. The Sicilian plan failed without Alpha needing to win the entire sea war that day. Levi left before the battlefield could reorganize around him and carried the new energy essence south. On an empty island near the storm belt, he upgraded extreme speed into a legendary talent. The change affected every movement attribute instead of merely making his legs faster. Air wings multiplied acceleration, while no distance turned short-range movement into something closer to appearing wherever he chose. Levi tested the combination and reached speeds comparable to second-stage legends who lacked specialized movement. That was exactly what he needed for the next campaign. The Duchy Alliance remained one of the most unstable regions on the continent. Earth Church controlled only part of it, tolerating independent principalities. Levi entered the region intending to make that compromise much more expensive. He used Skull Temple forces and disguised undead to attack Earth-backed duchies from directions that suggested an internal undead expansion. One Grand Duchy fell. Another neighboring state followed before Earth Church saw how coordinated the attacks were. Local rulers demanded reinforcements, forcing Earth to pull troops and legends away from larger battlefields. Levi did not need to conquer the Alliance. He only needed to make Earth Church spend strategic strength protecting places it had previously considered stable. The 5th legendary talent became one energy essence closer while every local response produced more targets. How many fronts could one church defend? That question mattered because Radiance was doing the same thing on a much larger scale. Inside the Holy Empire, the Radiant Pope contacted the Lord of Radiance through a hidden altar. The report was almost celebratory, because Radiance had managed to turn most of Noah into overlapping battlefields. Nearly every force across Noah had entered war except a few sea races and the Dragon clan. The plan to recreate late ancient chaos was working. One problem remained, and the Lord of Radiance cared about it more than several wars already going according to plan. 3 mysterious keys were still missing, including the key once connected to Geralt's family. The predicted hiding place had been searched thoroughly and produced nothing. The Lord of Radiance doubted the failure because the original location came from Star Demon's calculation. Either someone had taken the key without leaving a trace, or something now interfered with divination powerful enough to locate it. Radiance ordered the chaos accelerated anyway, preferring a missing key problem to slow the timetable as little as possible. A second-stage legend would also be sent toward the abandoned lands to watch whatever remained sealed there. The Pope accepted the order and immediately began widening pressure across existing battlefields. One of the legends available for that mission was Pieta, a rare dual wind and lightning mage. Pieta still carried a personal wound from the death of his lightning elemental companion Fischl in the Western Sea. He believed elves or dwarves had probably been responsible. The Pope listened without correcting the assumption. For Radiance, personal hatred was useful as long as it moved in the right direction. Pieta received instructions tied to the abandoned lands and began preparing to leave. Far away, Levi knew nothing about the mage's private vendetta. He only knew the world had become chaotic enough that moving alone would soon stop being unusual. Stormwind's agents reported wars in Philo, the Duchy Alliance human seas orc territory. Each conflict had different flags and increasingly similar sponsors. Levi had spent years converting isolated crises into resources. Now the crises were merging faster than he could visit them one by one. That was the real change of the era. No single victory reset the board anymore. Killing a legend in Sicily weakened Earth Church there, and caused reinforcements somewhere else. Breaking an orc attack released troops that immediately became useful in Philo. Saving one fleet change which Church could afford the next land offensive. The strategic map had become one connected machine built from wars pretending to be separate. Levi returned toward the northern continent with that realization becoming harder to ignore. Ahead of him, the next battlefield waited inside human territory. Behind him, Radiance had just ordered the entire machine to move faster. And somewhere near the abandoned lands, Pieta was already flying toward a collision neither man had planned. The Pope also ordered battlefield commanders to stop treating local victories as sufficient objectives. Every front now needed to force the enemy to commit more reserves than the land itself justified. Radiance wanted exhaustion spreading through alliances faster than diplomacy could repair them. The method looked chaotic from below and carefully staged from above. That distinction bothered Levi even before he knew who was coordinating it. Independent wars usually created accidental gaps where one faction could recover. These wars kept opening new pressure exactly when another front began to stabilize. What if the continent's chaos was not the failure of order, but somebody else's successful strategy? Levi had enough enemies to avoid assuming one mastermind too quickly. Still, he started treating simultaneous crises as connected until evidence proved otherwise. That meant keeping clones near Stormwind, faster movement between theaters, and wider use of contracted intelligence networks. It also meant protecting the family from dangers that would never appear on a conventional battle map. Anduin's newborn son represented a future several hostile churches would consider leverage if they discovered weakness. Levi ordered family security increased without turning the household into a prison. Angelis approved because she had survived enough church politics to know bloodlines became targets before children. Why? The new generation had inherited Stormwind's wealth, titles, enemies, and expectations in the same breath. A normal noble house might call that privilege. Levi called it another defense budget arriving early. Then the latest intelligence placed a radiant second stage mage near the route toward the abandoned lands. The name attached to the report was Pieta. While Levi moved between battlefields, the Lord of Radiance followed a trail toward the missing third key. He brought the problem to Star Demon Vitrion, whose predictions had originally pointed toward Geralt's hidden ruin. Vitrion tried to trace the key again and watched his own starlight collapse before the calculation could stabilize. A second attempt failed. A third nearly injured the legendary third-stage demon through backlash. That reaction surprised even the Lord of Radiance. Vitrion admitted the person most closely connected to the key had somehow become impossible for his divination to calculate. The explanation should have been impossible under normal hierarchy. No active supreme being was supposed to be moving openly through the current universe. Then Vitrion changed the question and checked whether the key still remained somewhere on Noah. That answer came back positive, confirming the missing key had never left Noah despite every failed search. The key was still on the plane. The Lord of Radiance immediately stopped thinking about the key alone. A treasure capable of hiding someone from third-stage divination could matter more than the seal the key was meant to open. Vitrion narrowed the mystery to the northern continent and warned that everything beyond that remained hidden. The Lord of Radiance left with a new target and fewer usable details than before. Vitrion quietly sent a formless demon into Noah anyway, unwilling to abandon a mystery powerful enough to resist his sight. Far away, Levi felt the search without knowing who had started it. Super Foresight suddenly reacted to an attention so overwhelming that resistance did not even feel like a meaningful option. Levi froze near Death Swamp and refused to move until the sensation disappeared. A second-stage legend could still be fought. Whatever had looked toward him belonged to a higher problem. What had Levi collected without understanding its value enough to attract a third-stage existence? He spent days near the edge of the abandoned lands, waiting for the hostile attention to return. It did not return, which made the silence feel more calculated than comforting. That absence felt less comforting than it should have. Levi moved deeper into preparation instead of trying to hunt something he could not yet survive. His attacks across southern battlefields had already relieved pressure on Dawn more than most allies saw. Sicily's navy became cautious after the failed encirclement, unwilling to sacrifice ships. Earth Church redirected forces toward the Duchy Alliance, where Levi's manufactured undead wars had become a real strategic problem. Radiance also pulled legends away from several fronts for secret assignments. Reyes and Nelson noticed the pattern and suspected Levi before any official message confirmed it. The Goddess of Dawn did confirm it. That knowledge let Dawn shift more strength toward the next orc campaign, without fearing the southern fronts would collapse immediately. New legends also emerged inside Alpha as wartime resources and old families converted emergency investments into breakthroughs. The church encouraged every success because the next war would need far more than the previous generation of powerhouses. Then the Goddess of Dawn intervened more directly. Gulveig had advanced her legendary spell structure and lacked only the elemental transformation needed for second stage. Divine power completed that missing step before ordinary cultivation would have allowed it. Nelson celebrated until Reyes explained the goddess had no spare reinforcements to send with the blessing. Whatever happened beyond Noah was consuming her attention as well. Dawn had gained one second-stage mage and received a warning disguised as help. Levi would need to return in time because there was nobody else waiting behind the curtain. The Dragon Clan created another form of support without formally joining the Human Alliance. Dragons demanded respect for territories inside the wild mountains. Legendary magical beasts grew bolder once they knew stronger dragons would punish large-scale retaliation. Orcs lost time clearing paths, repositioning troops. A dragon did not need to wave a human flag to help Alpha. It only needed to make the enemy spend another week reaching the same fortress. Those weeks helped Dawn survive the first wave of the renewed invasion. By midsummer, Levi completed the legendary spell that would define his mage path. Chaos Domain fused Hand of Chaos, Eye of Chaos. Inside the domain, Levi could interfere with elemental behavior and touch the shallow edges of rule manipulation. The effect still fell far below true third-stage authority. Against first-stage legends, however, it changed the rules enough to become a serious battlefield weapon. It might have been the end of preparation. Instead, it marked the beginning of Levi's mage tribulation. He chose the junction of the Earth-Fire Wasteland, Western Sea Storm Belt, and Abandoned Land. The sealing barrier there suppressed many elements without placing him close enough to risk damaging the core seal. Storm disasters provided additional cover, and dimensional space gave Levi routes through conditions that would trap experts. He sealed knightly power and refused to call Panda through the life contract. Alpha needed Panda available, and Levi did not intend to survive another breakthrough by draining the same bear again. Then the mage transformation began, pulling every elemental system inside Levi toward the same legendary threshold. All 10 elemental powers rose first, followed by chaotic fusion and a violent increase in mental strength. The mental magic tower inside Levi's consciousness changed with them. 7 days passed before the core transformation stabilized. His 3 Chaos sacred arts rose with the profession. The magical Calamity followed, attacking judgment and elemental control instead of relying only on overwhelming force. Chaos attacked from multiple elemental directions, sometimes tempting Levi into wrong reactions instead of simply overpowering defenses. At moments his own judgment blurred, making harmless gaps feel dangerous and lethal attacks feel strangely acceptable. Levi relied on physical legendary strength when magic became unreliable, enduring punishment a normal new mage could never absorb. The Calamity lasted for half a month. Then it retreated abruptly, as if even the storm had grown tired of trying to break him. Levi emerged as a legendary mage without the Dark Calamity arriving at the same time. That separation was good news for exactly one reason. A Dark Calamity based on Levi's current strength would need something close to second-stage legendary power to threaten him. Moments later, somebody flew out of the Abandoned Lands. Pieta arrived irritated, disheveled, and completely unaware that timing had just assigned him a role in someone else's tribulation. The Radiant Mage carried both wind and lightning at second-stage legendary quality. At first, Pieta almost pitied the newly advanced mage standing under the residue of Calamity. Then he attacked anyway, because pity had never stopped a Radiant legend from securing an unknown target. A wind cage closed around Levi before either man knew the other's full identity. Levi broke it with amplified power and forced Pieta to take the supposed victim seriously. 3 clones appeared, Chaos Domain unfolded. Airwings pushed Levi into movement fast enough to avoid a direct duel. Pieta answered with wind and lightning that made speed itself dangerous to contest. The first exchanges injured Levi badly despite every defensive talent he owned. Then Pieta destroyed a clone and received backlash through the kill. The remaining clones struck during that pause, driving destructive power deep into the Radiant Mage's body. Pieta recognized the erosion because his missing lightning elemental companion had. He asked whether Levi's Knight Dark Calamity had been a legendary lightning elemental. Levi's reaction answered before any words could. The name Fischl landed between them and changed the entire meaning of the battle. The name transformed Pieta from a cautious enemy into a furious one. The lightning elemental killed during Levi's earlier Calamity had been Pieta's companion, from before either reached legendary status. Pieta could not punish the universe for using Fischl as a Calamity. He could punish the man who survived by killing it. Rage made the second stage mage faster and less careful at the same time. 2 clones vanished almost instantly beneath wind and lightning, though their backlash continued damaging the attacker. Levi stopped trying to win directly, choosing movement and attrition over pride against a stronger dual elemental mage. He used no distance, air wings and fresh clones to keep Pieta moving. Pieta saw Levi struggling under the ceiling pressure and assumed the retreat had become a mistake. That assumption was exactly what Levi wanted. The deeper they moved, the more the barrier suppressed Pieta's elemental strength. Chaos Domain reinforced the same pressure from another direction while affecting Levi far less. Half a day into the chase, Pieta finally noticed the imbalance. The new legend in front of him was performing weakness inside terrain chosen specifically to weaken Radiance. Pieta changed direction immediately, finally recognizing the terrain itself had become part of Levi's strategy. Levi stopped pretending immediately after that, expanding Chaos Domain and pushing the suppression as hard as possible. A brief silence followed as Pietta's remaining speed fought Levi's ability to keep him inside suppression. The chase lasted far longer than either side wanted. Pietta consumed medicine, elemental reserves, and increasingly desperate movement techniques. Levi spent clones instead of risking the main body, letting backlash tax every successful hit Pietta landed. More than 10 days of attrition turned the second stage advantage into exhaustion. Pietta finally reached territory where the suppression weakened and believed escape had become possible. That was where Levi had arranged the final trap. The 9-colored tower descended with Lilith controlling its power, while Chaos Domain closed from the opposite side. Pietta tried to burst through before both structures stabilized. His injuries and depleted reserves made him one step too slow. Levi struck with destructive power while the tower denied the space needed for another clean acceleration. The second stage Radiant Mage fell at the edge of the abandoned lands. Levi stood over the corpse and finally accepted what the battle proved. He could kill a second stage legend under favorable terrain and survive if stronger enemies arrived alone. That fact would have terrified him years earlier. Now it looked like the minimum requirement for the wars waiting outside. Pietta had already sent an emergency signal during the retreat. Radiance tried to dispatch stronger help, but another battlefield crisis delayed the response. A first-stage priest with a divine artifact arrived later and found traces suggesting several legends had surrounded Pietta. The false battlefield Levi left behind was convincing enough that the priest refused to investigate deeper alone. By then, Levi had already reached the western coast with Pietta's corpse and a new bloodline talent awakening inside him. The power felt unfamiliar, neither wind nor lightning nor any ordinary elemental reward from the fallen mage. His first activation drained almost everything and produced no visible effect. Levi waited, recovered the strange power, and tried again with Lilith observing through the 9-colored tower. Nothing changed from Levi's perspective, which made the second test feel like another expensive failure. Lilith stopped responding, and that silence became the first clear sign something had happened after all. Levi called her several times before the ancient alchemical intelligence finally looked at him again. She said the world had changed for one impossible instant. From her perspective, time itself had stopped. That answer stripped the satisfaction from Levi's experiment. Temporal authority belonged near realms even legends could barely describe, not inside a newly advanced bloodline talent. Lilith warned that gods protected themselves from cosmic time through divine power. Levi had just touched the same forbidden concept without understanding how. The power recovered slowly enough that every test would need to be chosen carefully. What kind of bloodline freezes time before its owner can even explain what the talent is doing? Levi looked back toward the abandoned lands, where terrain, preparation, and suppression had helped him kill Pietta. The new talent felt like none of those things. It felt like something the rules had never intended him to possess. A brief silence followed as Levi did not celebrate the new talent at all. He had spent years turning unknown abilities into tools through testing, measurement, and repetition. This one discouraged repetition by exhausting itself and touching something Lilith considered fundamentally dangerous. A normal reward could be priced by damage, range, duration, or cultivation cost. Time refused every category Levi normally used. And that made the new bloodline power the most valuable thing he owned and the one he trusted least.